Hey, what is going on, guys? RvzStealth here, and in today's video we're going to be breaking down the new strong and weak picks for patch 10.13, so breaking down all the changes and discussing how those changes will affect each of the champions' placement in the meta. So first up here, we got a buff to Gnar. His attack speed on his E is being increased from 20 to 60% up to 40 to 60%. So it looks like they're kind of incentivizing you to use this ability more aggressively, having 20% extra attack speed now. If you're able to use that, jump forward and benefit from that attack speed, then you're going to deal quite a bit more DPS throughout the early stages of the game. Now, depending on the matchup, like you're not going to really use your E like that with Gnar. In a lot of matchups, you kind of have to save your E to back out or use it as an escape. But if you do end up snowballing in the early game, if you do get a nice lead going in lane or you poke the enemy out, then this change is definitely going to be noticeable, and I think that Gnar is going to be just a really solid A tier top laner for 10.13. Now we got some pretty interesting buffs here to AP Kogmaw. His Q AP ratio is going from 0.5 up to 0.7, and then his ultimate AP ratio going from 0.25 up to 0.35. So I don't think these are the biggest changes. If they were to buff his E AP ratio, I think that would tip him over the top a little bit. That could actually bring him into the meta. I feel like these changes will make him like a pretty decent mid lane pick now, an A tier / B tier mid lane pick, but I don't think they're the biggest changes in the world by any means. It's not going to make him broken or anything. So if you want to play AP Kogmaw though, now in this next patch, he does become a little bit more viable. So next up here for Lucian, his Q laser range is being increased from 900 up to 1000. So this is definitely a nice buff for Lucian. It gives him a little bit more agency in the laning phase, makes his bully potential a little bit stronger. I wonder how this is going to affect like solo lane Lucian though, because if you're playing Lucian in a melee matchup up in the top lane or in the mid lane, like this just makes his bully potential that much more insane, and it's going to be even more difficult if you're playing a melee champion into Lucian now. But I think overall, a nice change for Lucian. It's not going to make him S tier or anything. I think he's still going to stay an A tier pick, but it is a nice change nonetheless. And then Jungle Nocturne is getting a buff to his passive, so when you attack large monsters, you're now going to get double CDR on your passive. So this means that your clear in the early game is going to be a little bit faster. It means that you're going to be healthier as well in the early game, and it means that you're going to be able to hit that level 6 a little bit quicker. You should be able to hit it a little bit quicker. So Nocturne is, for the most part, all about hitting that level 6 spike. In certain matchups, you can look to duel in the early game. He's definitely not the worst early game duelist by any means, but for the most part, you're looking to hit that level 6. That's where he gets that really big spike there. So the fact they are buffing his ability to hit that level 6 is nice for this champion in this coming patch, and I think that depending on the elo, he could move up into A tier, but I still do think he is going to be one of the relatively weaker jungle picks. So AP Nunu is actually getting buffed for this coming patch. Q AP ratio, the damage on that is getting buffed from 0.5 up to 0.65. Q healing AP ratio is going from 0.7 up to 1. And his ultimate, it's now going to have a 1.5 AP ratio on the shield. So I know there's actually quite a few Nunu players in this patch right now that like to go for a Cinder Hulk into Proto Belt build. And I feel like with these changes, that build just becomes a lot more viable now for 10.13. I feel like that might now be the #1 build path for Nunu in this patch because of these crazy buffs to his AP ratios here. So look out for the build path with this champion in this coming patch. I feel like a Cinder Hulk into Protobelt and then Deadman's is probably now going to be the go-to on this champion. Now for Rakan, he's getting a buff to his W to where the damage is being increased from 270 up to 290 at max rank. It's still going to be 70 damage base there at level 1, so it looks like the more points you put into it, the more damage you're going to get in it now for 10.13. Pretty small buff overall though, 20 max damage there at max rank. I don't think that really does too much to Rakan in this patch here. If they were to buff his damage on that ability at level 1 and make his like all-in potential for the first couple levels stronger, I could definitely see him possibly jumping up into S tier, but I feel like he's still going to be an A tier pick despite these buffs. I don't even know why Riot tries to bother with this champion anymore. Ryze is getting a couple of buffs here, pretty laughable buffs. Base MR being increased from 34 up to 36, so a 2 MR increase, and then base AD is going from 56 up to 58, so pretty negligible for the most part. Ryze should still remain a C tier pick. Now, really nice buff here to Vi actually for 10.13. Q cooldown is being lowered from 12 to 8 down to 12 to 6. It's a 2-second decrease on her Q, which is actually quite big considering you do max this ability out first. So once you hit level 9, you're now going to have like a very short cooldown on that Q. 2 seconds off on a gap close ability and on a CC ability. It just gives her so much more agency in mid-game fights, because once you do use your combo on Vi, once you Q in, use your ultimate, you're kind of just standing around around like autoing for the duration of the fight or for a little bit until your Q comes back up. So you're always just waiting for that Q to come back up. When it comes back up, you can just do a lot more in fights with the champions. So I do think this is a really nice buff to Vi, and she's now going to be a great A tier pick for 10.13. And then final champion getting a buff for 10.13 is Yorick. His ultimate leash range is being decreased from 900 down to 700. So in previous patches, you would need to go out of 900 range of your maiden for it to start following you again. And this would just mean that it would be pretty easy for the enemy to just get a lot of damage off on your maiden if you didn't want them to. If you wanted your maiden to be like right up next to you, if you're not actually using it, like the enemy could just very easily attack it and take it down quickly. So this range being decreased here to 700 means your maiden is going to follow you a little bit quicker. It's not going to take as many hits from the enemy for free, and it's going to stay alive for a little bit longer. So just overall, really nice change to Yorick, and I think that for the lower elos, he could honestly jump up into S tier, so he's going to be like an A/S tier pick here for 10.13. So moving on to the champions getting nerfed now. First for Aphelios, his 80 per level is being decreased from 2.2 down to 2. Crescendum attacks on epic monsters are now no longer going to refresh chakram duration, so your ability to take out these early barons or just take objectives very quickly with Aphelios does get diminished a little bit here in 10.13. And then his ultimate crit bonus, it is being decreased from 50% down to 20%, so your ability to AoE nuke in fights for this coming patch here in the mid to late game does get decreased by quite a bit. I do think that with all three of these changes combined, Aphelios is going to drop down into B tier for the majority of elos. I can see for high elo him still remaining an A tier pick, but he is going to get a little bit weaker nonetheless. So it looks like for Cassiopeia, they're just giving her a partial revert on the base MR buff she received in last patch. Last patch, it went from 30 up to 34, and now in this patch, it's going from 34 down to 32. So they're just cutting it in half, or they're cutting the buff in half that she received in last patch. Not really going to do too much for Cassiopeia. She will still remain a very strong pick here in this patch. And then for Kalista, very similar change to Cassiopeia, pretty negligible for the most part. Her 80 per level is being decreased from 4 down to 3.5, so you're losing 0.5 80 per level on Kalista, which would mean at level 18 you're going to be losing like 9 AD, which is pretty small for the most part. I don't think it's going to change your placement on the tier list. She will still remain an A tier 80 carry. So next up here for Ornn, really interesting change to his brittle damage. It's being buffed in the early game and nerfed in the later games. So in this patch right now, it scales from 10% up to 18. And then in this coming patch, it's just going to be 12% at all ranks. So what this means is that from levels 1 through 5, you're going to now have more damage coming out of your brittle. But level 6 onwards, you're now going to have less damage. So this does mean that his early game, his trading potential in the laning phase does actually get a little bit stronger, but mid to late game fights are now going to be a little bit weaker for Ornn in this coming patch. Overall, I do think it's going to make him a little bit weaker, but I don't think it's going to be the end of the world for Ornn. I do still think he's going to be an A/B tier pick for 10.13. So probably the biggest and most impactful nerf here in 10.13 is going to go to Syndra. Her Q mana cost is being increased from 40 at rank 1 all the way up to 60. So 2 Qs now in this next patch for Syndra is going to be the equivalent of 3 Qs in 10.12. So that's a really big hit. It now means that her ability to bully in the laning phase does get a lot weaker. You're going to run out of mana a lot quicker now if you're just spamming Qs in lane with Syndra, and that's kind of how you would play in previous patches. You wouldn't really care too much about the mana cost on this ability. You'd just be spamming it out, trying to either shove or poke the opponent out in the early levels there, and that's what makes this pick, or that's one of the reasons to why this pick is just really strong right now. So I do think this change will drop her down into B tier for the majority of elos. High elo, I can still see her being like an A tier pick for this coming patch, but it's definitely going to make her a lot weaker here for 10.13. And then final champion nerf is to Yuumi. Her E mana cost is being increased from 100 to 60. It's now going to be 40 to 60 plus 15% of your max mana, and this seems like it might seem like it's a buff just based on the base only being 40 to 60 now, but that 15% max mana there, it is actually going to make it so that this ability does cost quite a bit more mana, especially later on into the game. So I did the math for this actually, and level 1, or actually level 2, once you get your first point into E there, it's going to be around like a 5 mana increase. So it's not the biggest change in the early levels, but once you hit the mid to late game, it's going to be around like a 30 to 40 mana increase now. Once you hit like level 13, once you get your E fully maxed out, it's around a 30 to 40 mana increase. So you're definitely going to feel this in the mid game with Yuumi. I do think that she could drop down into B tier with this change, but she will now be a little bit weaker, and she's going to be an A/B tier pick for 10.13. Now, if we round things out here by taking a look at a couple of changes to items and to runes, first for Conqueror, it's getting some changes to where the max stacks are being increased from 10 up to 12, and the adaptive you get per stack is being decreased from 2 to 5 down to 1.7 to 4.2. Now, when you get max stacks now with Conqueror in this coming patch, it's actually going to end up being a buff. You're going to have like 0.4 extra AD now if you can get Conqueror to those 12 stacks. Prior to getting those 12 stacks though, 11 stacks and less, if I did the math correctly, you're going to be getting less adaptive now from this rune. So if you're playing a champion who can very easily get to those 12 stacks, if that's not an issue at all for you, say you're playing a champion with that can just spam out abilities like Cassio or Garen can stack it up very quickly, Urgot can stack it up very quickly, I don't think these changes here are really going to do too much for those champions. It's more so going to be a nerf to champions that struggle to stack this up. If you're playing somebody like Kha'Zix in the jungle, for example, right now, that doesn't really have like spammy abilities that he can use to just very easily get to 12 stacks, or if you're playing something like Nidalee jungle, I feel like those are the kind of champions that are going to be hurt more by these changes. And then for Death's Dance, it is getting a nerf for ranged champions only. So the stored damage for range is being decreased from 20% down to 10%. So you're looking at a small nerf here to champions like Ezreal and Aphelios. Those are 280 carries right now that are doing very well with this item. You're also looking at a small nerf to Urgot because he does count as a ranged champion and he's doing pretty well with this item right now. Is it going to stop players from building this item though? I really don't think so. I still think it's going to be built as your third item on Ezreal. I still think it's going to be a really good third or fourth item on Aphelios, so it makes those champions a little bit weaker, but I don't think it's going to stop people from buying the item. And then I guess Riot ended up overshooting on the Guardian buffs last patch because they're nerfing it right away here in 10.13. Shield is being decreased from 80 to 200. It's now going to be 70 to 150. So you're losing 10 shielding there at level 1. You're losing 50 shielding later on in the game, which is actually pretty big. And this is going to be a hit to champions like Bard, Lulu, who are two of the best supports right now in 10.12. So they're going to be dropped down in power a little bit for this coming patch. Also a bit of a hit to the Taric, the Rakan, the Braum. Those are like 5 champions right now that are doing very good with this rune that will get a bit weaker for this coming patch. Alright, so that is going to be all for the video, guys. That is what we're looking at here heading into 10.13. So if you guys did enjoy this video, be sure to drop a like and subscribe if you have yet to already. So thanks for watching, have an awesome day, and I will see you in my next video.